The name Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart is almost universally instantly recognizable as the name of the legendary classical composer. But what about Constanze Mozart, his wife? Although she is sometimes overlooked, Constanze Mozart also lived a very fascinating and undoubtedly important life, playing a key role in her husband's story. However, a decade after she died, a scandalous photo emerged of her, causing a public story. Soon after, historians carefully examined the photo and made a shocking discovery. Constanze Weber was born in Germany in 1762 in the town of Mannheim. It just so happened that her father, Fridolin Weber, played double bass and also worked in the opera as a prompter, which may explain the way he encouraged his 4 daughters to pursue the arts. This exposure to the world of music helped shape Constanze's own understanding of the art form and would later be instrumental in her relationship with Mozart. All of his daughters would turn out to be excellent singers, and Constanze's 2 older sisters would actually go on to have notable singing careers of their own. In 1777, a young man named Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart traveled to Mannheim in search of work. Here, he became acquainted with the musical Weber family. It was here that he met and fell for Constanze's older sister, Aloysia Weber. As it turned out, no relation would form between Mozart and Aloysia. As he couldn't find work in Mannheim, he eventually set off for Paris, but he never forgot about Aloysia. After some time in Paris, Mozart returned to Germany and once again began pursuing Constanze's older sister. He even went so far as to propose to her. Aloysia, however, turned him down cold. This rejection, though perhaps painful for Mozart at the time, would ultimately pave the way for his relationship with Constanze later on. Since Aloysia was the most successful singer of the Weber sisters, the family would move around more as her career took off. They spent some time in Munich before eventually settling in Vienna, where Aloysia got a new job. However, shortly after arriving in Vienna, Constanze's father passed away. This immediately put the family in a precarious financial situation. To make extra money, the family began renting out rooms in the building where they lived. It just so happened that Mozart needed a place to stay at the time and began renting from them. This time around, Mozart became interested not in Aloysia, but in her younger sister, Constanze. Mozart and Constanze became close friends and eventually began courting. According to many historians, they made a perfect match. Constanze's musical knowledge and grounded personality went perfectly with Mozart's musical passions and more whimsical demeanor. The young couple carried on their courtship for some time without much notice. However, eventually Constanze's mother did notice, and she did not like it. Although she didn't have a problem with Mozart himself, she worried about how it looked for both of them to be living in her home while unmarried. Mozart did oblige her and move elsewhere, but that would not be the end of their troubles. It just so happened that Mozart's father also didn't approve. Although it's not explicitly stated, he seemingly didn't believe the two were a good match. Mozart's father had hoped for a more advantageous match for his son, perhaps a woman with a noble title or wealth, rather than a middle-class singer from a modest family. Leopold Mozart was a domineering figure in his son's life. He reportedly felt concern that the Weber family's financial instability might burden his son. Despite the issues, Mozart and Constanze managed to keep their love alive despite the resistance they faced from their families. However, during a get-together, Constanze threatened the relationship with her own antics. She engaged in some parlor games with mixed company, and in one of the games, she let another young man take some very intimate measurements. When Mozart found out that Constanze had let another man measure her calves during a game, he was furious. So furious, in fact, that they reportedly broke up over it. It sounds silly, but considering how modestly women dressed during this era, it was quite scandalous. In the end, they would eventually work things out and get back together. Shortly after getting back together, Constanze made a very bold move when she moved in with Mozart. Although this wouldn't draw much attention in our modern days, in 1782, 2 unmarried people living together caused quite the controversy. When Constanze's mother heard the news, she didn't take it well. She reportedly approached Mozart and insisted he marry her daughter as soon as possible. She even gave him an ultimatum, trying to get him to pay her a yearly allowance to provide a living for her if she ended up an ostracized and unmarried woman. She also got Sophie, Constanze's younger sister, to help. Sophie told Mozart that if Constanze didn't return home, their mother planned to call in the authorities to remove her. After this, Mozart finally decided to tie the knot. Corresponding with his father, Mozart told him that he planned to finally marry Constanze, with or without his father's consent. The two would be married on August 4th, 1782. The very day after the wedding, a letter arrived in the mail for Mozart. It turned out to be his father finally giving in and offering his approval for Mozart to marry Constanze. Though she didn't receive her due credit until much later, Constanze's relationship with Mozart contributed to some of his greatest compositions. Most notably, she made an impression on him by herself falling in love with the fugues of composers like Bach and Handel. She fell so much in love with them that she pressed her husband to make something especially for her. As a result, he composed the Great Mass in C minor, which remains one of his lauded classics. In their relationship, Constanze became pregnant many times. Sadly, as was common during the time, many of her children didn't live past infancy. Over the course of 8 years, Constanze birthed 6 children, with only 2 actually surviving into adulthood. Most likely due to her frequent pregnancies, Constanze experienced many health issues during their marriage. As a result, she often spent time at a nearby sulfur spa to help her body heal. However, attending the spa was not cheap, and it started to affect the new couple's financial stability. As their marriage continued, Mozart's celebrity status began to rise very fast. He composed several renowned works and attracted notable crowds to his solo performances. With this newfound success, they soon realized they had to fit in with Vienna's high society and the conspicuous displays of wealth that went along with it. They bought an expensive new apartment, furnished it with pricey items, and even sent their son off to a ritzy boarding school. Although their new lifestyle was in line with Mozart's growing fame, it was unsustainable, and the couple's spending outpaced their income, plunging them deeper into debt. In the early 1790s, Mozart suddenly fell very ill. Doctors couldn't determine the actual cause of his ailment, nor figure out how to cure him. Constanze stayed close by his side until he finally died in November 1791. Overwhelmed with grief, Constanze even made the decision not to attend her husband's funeral. It's also said that only a few people attended, a stark contrast to the large crowds that had often gathered to hear him perform. Although Mozart was now gone, he left her with a vast amount of debt that they had accumulated over the years. Constanze herself didn't have a regular job and no clear path to taking care of herself on her own. Luckily for her, Mozart's life soon made a living for her in ways she likely didn't expect. Recognizing the very important contribution that Mozart had made to classical music, Constanze started her mission to take care of herself and her family. By going to Emperor Leopold II, she successfully entreated him to give her a pension in honor of Mozart's contributions. In addition to the pension she was now receiving, Constanze began to organize memorial benefit concerts for Mozart. The performances featured his classic works, while the ticket money helped her to take care of herself. These concerts not only generated income, but also kept Mozart's music alive by introducing his works to new audiences. Continuing the expansion of her sources of revenue, she officially published her husband's work, therefore monetizing the rights to his music and preserving his compositions in memory. With all these efforts, she was not just sustaining herself, but was creating notable wealth. In 1794, Constanze launched a benefit performance of Mozart's La Clemenza di Tito. Her sister Aloysia took one of the leading roles during a performance in Vienna, while Constanze herself took the role in other performances of the show. By the late 1790s, Constanze even became a landlord. It provided yet another opportunity to supplement her income, considering her children were now in school. In 1797, a Danish man named Georg Nicholas von Nissen began living in one of her rooms, and much like had happened before, the two began to bond. Nissen was a diplomat, but was also a writer. He especially majored in music history, which made him just the right man to help Constanze with her next endeavor, putting together a comprehensive biography of Mozart's life. Spending so much time together, Constanze and Nissen soon became a couple. He helped with negotiations over Mozart's published works, taking over where it might be easy for publishers to take advantage of Constanze as a woman. Eventually, Nissen became part of the family as a whole. He served as a father figure to Constanze's children, helping to care and guide them wherever he could. Only a year after they met, Nissen moved in with Constanze. Even despite their ages, as they were both in their 30s at the time, it still didn't look right for an unmarried man to be living with an unwed widow. At the time, Austria maintained very strict rules around marriage. One of those rules prevented Protestants from marrying Catholics. That meant Constanze, a lifelong Catholic, couldn't officially marry Nissen, who was a devout Protestant. Nonetheless, they would find a way. In 1809, they left their home and fled to Hungary, where they were officially married. The very next year, they moved to Nissen's hometown, Copenhagen, Denmark. This move to Copenhagen marked a new chapter for Constanze. With things in order now, they went about living their lives well and traveling around Europe. However, even with this new love in her life, she didn't forget her first. Nissen and Constanze continued to work on Mozart's biography together. They spent a copious amount of time collecting both his letters and numerous other documents, organizing them in order to pen his biography. This would go on to become one of the foundational texts for Mozart scholarship and would help scholars understand his character for centuries to come. However, before they could finish the work, Nissen died in March 1826. Constanze undoubtedly took her time to grieve her second husband, but when it came time to finish Mozart's biography, she made sure it would be completed. With the assistance of another biographer, Constanze officially completed the biography, publishing it in 1828. And with that, Constanze preserved the story of her husband's life for many generations to come. With what seemed to be her greatest life's work finally complete, she settled down for some well-earned rest. Constanze moved back to Austria, settling in Salzburg, where she lived with her sisters, Aloysia and Sophie. During this time, Constanze remained active in musical circles, attending concerts and corresponding with scholars about Mozart's work. Her home in Salzburg even became a sort of pilgrimage site for admirers of Mozart, until she passed peacefully in 1842. Although she had lived a very good life, after she died, what people said about her would change. Throughout the 20th century, historians tried to alter the narrative of Constanze's life. They perpetrated theories that she had no musical skill to speak of. Even more than that, they cast suspicion on her support of Mozart, implying that she wanted him for his money. These claims were rooted in misogynistic assumptions and portrayed Constanze as frivolous or manipulative, despite evidence to the contrary. However, more recent studies show a very different truth, viewing earlier assumptions about Constanze as unfair, and that she was a very capable and loyal partner under the difficult circumstances they lived in. There's no telling what would have become of Mozart's legacy if Constanze hadn't committed herself to the enormous task of preserving it. While it's quite possible that other scholars might have eventually tried to share his story, they'd likely miss out on the first-hand access to documents that Constanze preserved in order to give an accurate biography of his life. Decades after her passing, a hidden photo emerged, causing much controversy. In 1958, a photograph claiming to depict a 78-year-old Constanze was revealed. The photo supposedly showed her seated beside another famous composer, Max Keller, implying a different life. While a photo like that would definitely be nice to have in the archives, evidence soon came out that refuted its legitimacy. After examining the photo, critics quickly invalidated the claim. Not only did the camera lens used for the picture not exist when Constanze lived, but she also suffered from arthritis in her later years. She likely didn't retain enough mobility to take such a photo. Nonetheless, aside from the scandal and debate, Constanze's story re-emerged in all its truth, and with it came the honor she deserved. Today, she is increasingly recognized not just as Mozart's wife and widow, but as an early example of a woman who managed art, business, and family in 18th century European society.